Great, we're recording. Cool, so what we're going to do is I'm going to take you guys to a tool that's kind of helpful. We're not going to be using it all the time, but just for this initial thing, we're going to go on over to Code Sandbox. All right. Anyone ever been to this site before? Okay. So in Code Sandbox, we have the opportunity to create different types of sandboxes. We can create a React sandbox, which we're not going to do right now, or we can just create any kind of sandbox, and it'll give us some options once we click on that. So you can see we've got a whole bunch of different possibilities. We can create an Angular sandbox, a static sandbox. I'm just going to create a vanilla JS sandbox. Okay. Cool. And then notice here, we've got some code up in here. So there's this index.js file that's being loaded up. And in that file, we're saying document.getElementID by ID app, and then we're setting its inner HTML. That's pretty cool, right? That's just vanilla JavaScript. So maybe before, when you guys were using jQuery, how would you have done that?
Import the library from like Google somewhere.
Yeah, so you definitely have to load it up at the top of the page, correct? And then how would we do it syntactically if we were trying to set that inner HTML? Anybody remember the $sign?
Oh yeah.
Right? We would do dollar, and then in parentheses we would say #app, right, to say that we're getting that specific ID. And then after that, we could chain a .html call, which would just pass in a bunch of HTML to it. Okay? So it looks slightly different. We wouldn't be saying .inner HTML equals this thing. We would call this method HTML, and then in parentheses, we would pass all of this stuff right here. Okay, cool. So document, again, is referencing what exactly?
The HTML page.
The actual HTML page that we're on, right? Okay. So what we want to do today is going to be kind of simple. I'm going to create a form up at the top, and then right underneath that, we're just going to have a list of some different items that we're iterating through. Okay? So it'll be like we're adding some tasks of things that we need to do. Okay? Cool. So let's get rid of this code right here. Is this big enough? Can you guys see, like if I type in here, pretty visible? Yeah, you know. All right, let me see if I can make it bigger. All right, well, it's going to squish it a little bit, but that's okay. All right, and then can I minimize? Maybe if I can minimize this sidebar here. Oh, there we go. That's better. Okay, cool. So let's say I just want to add in a div inside here. How can I go about doing that?
In JavaScript?
Yes. Yeah, so first off, let's actually create a div, right? So let's say something like this. I'm going to create a variable called div. I'm going to set that equal to document, and then we're going to invoke this function called createElement. Okay, and then inside that, I'm going to pass the string div saying I want to create an actual div element. Okay, now if I want to put some text inside that div, what I can do is I can say div.innerText, and then set that equal to whatever I want. So we'll just say, it's pretty traditional to say hello world, right? Okay, but wait a minute, it's not on there yet. What's happening? We didn't actually add it to our DOM yet, right? I created the element, but it's just kind of like sitting out there in space somewhere. It hasn't actually been added. So what I can do is I can say document.body dot. Okay, so before we even do that, document.body is referencing what?
The body of the HTML.
The body of the HTML, exactly. it's that second child, right, after the head child. All right, and we're going to say append child, and I'm going to pass in this div that I just created. All right? So that's pretty cool, right? We've just created this with vanilla JavaScript. We didn't write any actual HTML. All right. Any questions about that? About just creating an element? Pretty much makes sense?
Does that edit the actual HTML document so that when you open it, you see that div, or is it just in the context of it having?
No, that's a fantastic question. So if we open up the HTML document, no, it would not have this inside the HTML. It's only happening after the browser has gotten a chance to parse through our JavaScript.
Would you be able to just link index.js into the HTML file so that hello world shows up? Or?
Yeah, but again, what's going to happen is the browser will then make a request to index.js, and then it's going to have to parse through this code right here. Okay? So there's always going to be sort of a slight delay as to when the page actually loads up in your browser and when you would see that. It might not be noticeable because in this case we only have such a small amount of JavaScript, right? It's not gonna slow it down much.
Also, could you create an entire web page without an HTML document, just with JavaScript?
Well, you'll at least want there to be like a shell of an HTML document.
Right. But could you do that if you wanted to?
Where is it going to get its JavaScript if you have no HTML page?
I mean, like, you
right?
have the document there, but you could, instead of having the content in the HTML document, you just
yeah, of course. And then you could totally fill it out however you want. Absolutely. Yeah. Totally. All right. Cool. So the next thing that we want to do, we said we wanted to have a form here that was kind of taking in some inputs, right? So we can add some tasks. All right. So how can I create that? Same way, right? We can call the same thing create element. So we'll say document.createElement, and I'll just create a variable for this. We'll call it form. Document. Okay. Form. Okay. And then inside this form, I also want to have an input, right? And probably a submit button so I can do something with the form. So let's do that. So let's say const input equals document.createElement input. Okay. I'm going to create another one for a button. Button. All right. Now again, these things are not on the page. And why is that again?
didn't append it.
I haven't actually appended these things. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So what I want to do initially is I want to append the input and the button to what? Do I want to append that to the body?
No, to the form.
I want to append it to the form. Very good. So we'll say form.append child input, and then we'll say form.append child button.
Can you do that on one line?
Append two childs in one call?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you can.
Or you can
Yeah.
read it. Just return self.
We could try.
Like input and then maybe comma button.
You guys are into chaining. We could try it. All right, so one other thing that I wanted to do with this button is just give it some text inside of it, right? Because if we don't put something inside the button, probably won't look like much, and we won't have much to click on. So let's say button.innerText equals submit. Okay, so assuming that we've properly appended these two guys, what else do we need to do to get this to show up on our page?
Append the form to the button.
Yeah, exactly. So let's do document.body.append child form. Okay. Looks like that didn't work, right? What? So the problem was we got 2.
Bless you.
Nice. The problem was we didn't get this button to append, right? So it looks like chaining is at least temporarily a no-go. So let's cap that off and let's go back to form. What's the other thing we might want to put inside this form so that we know what our input is even for?
Label.
A label. Yeah, that'd be good. All right, so let's just go up here. Const label equals document dot create element label. Okay, what do I need to do to make sure that my label actually shows up? I've got to append it to the form. And what's the other thing? So if I append this this label, we don't see anything. Why not? The label doesn't have any text content inside of it, right?
Would you do inner text as well?
Yeah, let's just do inner text. So we'll say label dot inner text, and then we'll say equals task, or we'll say to do. Okay? All right, so that looks pretty good so far. Now, how am I going to actually keep things up to date as far as whatever the value is for that particular input? Do I have any way of doing that? Okay. Yeah, we could do that, right? So let's go down here. We'll just say let val equals a blank string, right? Okay. So now, but when the user starts typing something in that input, how do I know when that's happened? Or how can I respond to that? Yeah, but will that value attribute tell me when the thing has changed?
Oh, when it's a bit button. On click, yeah.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of different answers here. That's okay. All right, so what we're doing is we want to listen for a specific activity, right? So the activity that we're listening for is actually called input. All right? So the way that we can do that is we can say input dot add event listener. Okay? And what we're listening for is input. And what we can pass in here is a callback function. Does anybody know what a callback function is?
Yeah, right.
What did someone say? Like it's when you get the jump or something?
When you get the job.
Oh, when you get the job, that kind of callback.
You get that text back.
Ah, okay. So how about a callback function in the context of JavaScript? What does that mean?
It calls the
Another
function.
function being called within a function.
Okay. Yeah, it's like a function that's going to be called within a function. So basically what it means is we're going to pass in some code that we want to run whenever that event triggers. Okay? So every time somebody starts entering some text in our input, we want this function to run. Okay? And what do we want our function to do? Because we want to keep this little val variable up to date with whatever's currently in the input. Anybody know how we can do that?
Oh, yeah.
So you can see that I'm creating a function inside here. I'm going to pull it out of there for the meantime, just to make this a little bit more clear. So we'll say, we'll call this function update val. Okay? This is going to take in an event. And then instead of this inline function definition, I'm just going to pass this in. So we'll just say update val. All right. Inside the update val, again, it's going to take in the actual event. What is the event again?
The input.
It's the input itself, right? to get the value of what the person has just entered, I can go in a couple levels. So I can say console.log event.target.value. Does anybody know what the target is? The target is the thing that created the actual event. It's the input, right? So if I say event.target, that's saying this input right here. And then if I say .value, that's giving me whatever's in the value at that time. Okay? All right, so right now we're just console logging it. I've got a console down here, which is pretty handy. So if I start typing in here, you see how it's showing me what I'm typing? Pretty cool, right? So in that sense, we're running this function every single time I hit a keystroke.
Like Google.
Yes. All right, so now that we're inside this function, how can we update that value? I can just say val equals event.target.value, right? So that way, by the time the person decides, hey, I'm going to submit this form, I know exactly what's in that input at that point, right? It's not like I need to go find out what's in the input. I already know. All right. So that's good. So that should be staying up to date for me. Now, what's the next thing that I probably want to listen for? What's the next event that I want to pay attention to? Yeah, so there are two things here. Obviously, there's the click of the button. That's one thing that I can listen for. But would that capture if a person presses enter inside the input? No, because they didn't actually click on the button, right? In contrast, if I were to listen for the submit of the form, that should capture everything. So it would capture both a button click and just a regular submission if they click enter inside the input. All right? So let's add an event listener to the form. Okay? And we'll create a, again, let's create a function for this. So we'll say function submit form. What's this function going to take in, do you guys think? It's going to take in an event, right? Just like the other one did. So when we're doing event listeners, our callback function will always take in an event. Okay, now the first thing that we want to do when we're submitting forms in JavaScript is we want to prevent the form from submitting in its normal way. So normally what would happen when I click submit in a form? What's that? Well, either way, I mean, they're doing the same thing, right? If I click the submit button or if I hit enter in one of the form fields, what's happening at that point? It's going to be making some type of an HTTP request, right? Now, when I'm doing this in JavaScript, generally I don't want the form to do its natural type of submission. I want to sort of intercept that submission and do something else with it, okay? Because I don't want this actual page to refresh, and I certainly don't want to go anywhere else, right? I just want to do something at that point. All right. Yeah, so we're going to call this function called prevent default. So we'll say event.prevent default. That will prevent the form's natural mechanism. Okay? All right. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to take whatever's in that input and we want to add it to some sort of an array. Have we created one of those yet? No. So let's just create an empty array that we're adding to. So we'll just say const to-dos. It's just going to be an empty array to begin with. All right. And then what can I do to get this thing inside my to-dos array? Push. Yeah, so not append. Append would be in Python, right? Syntactically. Okay, cool. So we'll say to-dos dot push. And then what are we going to push in there? Val, right? So we have this thing val where we can keeping track of whatever's in that input. So let's just push that in. Okay. The other thing I might want to do just for user experience is I might want to clear out this input right in there. Anybody know how I can do that? I like your thinking. So yeah, we could just say input, because we have this variable called input, which is referencing that input. And we'll say input.val equals an empty string. Right? Okay. So let's see if we can insert things in here. So theoretically, uh-oh. What did I not do?
Callback function.
No, it's not that. Have I done anything with this function? I didn't add the event listener to the form, right?
Yeah, so it seems to also come from like every time you type something in the page.
Yeah, so I mean that part was still working
Okay.
right here. This was fine because I added the event listener to input, right? Okay, so for the form, I want to add an event listener. And this time what we're listening for is submit. Okay? The callback function that I'm going to provide is this, submit form. All right, so let's try that a couple times. We'll just say something. Okay. Why did our value not change? Huh. Our value did change, right? Say it again. No. No, it doesn't have to be. So again, the reason why we're adding it to the actual submit event of the form is because that way we'll capture if someone presses enter inside one of those form fields.
But aren't you preventing someone pressing enter? With the penalty form?
No. That's not preventing someone from clicking the button. What that's doing is preventing the form from submitting in its natural way. That's all. Yeah. Here's the problem. I said .val instead of val. Sorry about that. All right. All right, so let's try that again. I'm going to do something in here, and then when I press enter, we did our submit, and then it cleared out the input for me, right? Okay, cool. So that's working exactly as expected. Now, what's going on with my to-dos, though? So theoretically, I pushed something to this array, but am I seeing it on screen?
No.
No. Why not? What's that?
You haven't said anything for it to show you.
Correct. So let's actually create a container where we're going to put all of our to-dos, right? So we'll just say const container equals document.createElement, right? Is this getting kind of tedious for anyone yet? Yes or no? Is this fun? All right. You're still on vacation. Whoa, what happened here? Document. Why am I trying to do this to the document? Okay, document.body. All right. So now we at least have a container div that's happening after this form where we can make our to-dos appear, right? What kind of logic do you think I'm going to have to do to actually make my to-dos show up? And where should I put that logic? What's that? A table?
Unsorted list. The append.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Got it. You guys are talking like actual HTML elements. I was just thinking like in terms of where we're going to write the code to do this, where do we want to update the DOM? Like at the very bottom? Down here? Why don't we do it inside of our submit handler, right? Because inside the submit handler is when I know that somebody has in fact added an into to the list, right? So let's do it in there. Now I could do it down at the bottom as somebody suggested here, but what's going to happen if I just add it at the bottom?
You're just gonna push empty strings in there.
Well, it'll be a complete empty array for right now, right? And so basically, I would have something in here that was empty. Would it ever update? No. It would just stay that way, right? Instead, if we put it inside the submit handler, we can add to it every single time, which is what we want to do. Okay. So after this, after we've cleared out the input, let's go change the inner HTML of this container div that we created right here. Okay, so I have a handy little method that I can use, container.innerHTML, and I can set that to whatever I want. For now, I'll just put in some p tags just to show you guys how this works. Added this. Empty p tag. Okay, cool. So every time I submit this form, you see, it's doing that for us, right? It's changing the inner HTML of that container. Okay, but I don't want it to say added this. I want it to actually show my to-dos, right? How are we going to work through our to-dos in sort of a nice way and build up an HTML string? How do you guys want to do that?
Unsorted list.
We don't really have double mustache here because we're not using a templating engine, right? That was a good idea, though. A UL, okay. All right, that's fine. We can make a UL. Okay, and then I'm going to concatenate to that an end UL tag. Okay, what's going to go in between these guys? It's not going to be a single value, though. What's it going to be? It's going to be all the different items that are in my to-do list, right? Okay. So I'm going to show you guys a handy little function here called map that will allow us to basically build something from all of those in one shot. All right. So we've got this variable called to-dos. We're going to say to-dos.map. Okay. Has anybody used map before? Huh? Oh, these guys. Okay, so what those are doing, that's creating some string concatenation for us. So it's just concatenating this opening UL tag to whatever string that we create in here to also the ending UL tag. Okay? All right. So the way that the map function works is that it's going to take in some particular item that we're looking at inside of our array, and then we're basically going to transform that item in a certain way. Now, if I want to do a UL, an unordered list like this, what do I want each item in my array to look like? I want it to be surrounded by those li tags. Exactly. So that's how I can transform that specific element. So I'm going to create a function here. It's going to be called map item. That function will take in an item, and then I'm going to return a string that has an opening li tag. I'm going to concatenate the item to it, and then I'm also going to concatenate a closing li tag. Okay? Now, when I run this to-dos map function, what that's going to give me is it's going to give me each one of those items all in an array again. Only the new array is going to have them all surrounded by li tags. Well, that's kind of nice, but I want this to be a string, right? Does anyone know how I can quickly turn that array into a string? Good guess, but no. I have another function that I can use for arrays called join. Okay? And what that allows me to do is it allows me to join everything in an array on some specific character that I choose. Now, I can also choose an empty string, which is just going to sandwich all the elements in the array together. That's what I want it to be, right? I just want it to be a bunch of strings with nothing in between them. Okay? So the todos.map is going to take in my map item function. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to join all of those elements with an empty string so that they're all right next to each other. All right, now let's try it. Questions?
What's at the end of the, is there anything else after the todos.map?
Yeah, actually, let me split this up so it's a little bit clearer here. So I'll drop this on the next line. I'll put that on the next line too. So let's make sure that we kind of understand what's going on here. So we've got our to-dos, which is this array, and then I'm calling a map method on it. The map method needs to take this callback function, which I've established up here, right? So the callback function just takes in an item, and then it essentially surrounds it with li tag, opening and closing li tags. Now, once I've run that map function, it's going to give me a brand new array that has all of these strings in it. And then if I want the whole thing to be a string, not in an array form, I could join it on an empty string. Okay?
If you did the join method, how does it look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. Probably not great. Let's see here. It's putting commas in there.
Separating the array.
Why? Is there a floating comma somewhere in your function? In your call of the function?
Floating comma.
Yeah.
Wait, no. I don't have a sinking one either.
Probably defaults until you see it.
Maybe because it's
Because it's just doing the array.
Yeah.
It's giving you that concept.
So it's basically trying to turn the array into a set of strings. But when it does that, it has commas inside of it, which obviously is not how I want it to look. So, yes.
So by joining it with the empty code.
So by joining it on an empty string, that's making sure that all of my elements are right next to each other with no commas in between them. Yeah.
so for the map, the parameter it takes is a function, right? But when you actually want to call a function, don't you have to put parentheses after the function?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Are we calling the function?
I think we call it, but like it's not called within the.
Are we calling it directly?
I don't think so.
No, it's the map method that's calling that function, right? Not us. So yeah, the map method under the hood is then invoking this function that we wrote to run on each specific item in the array. So what I'm going to do is I'll post up a link to this code Sandbox so you guys can kind of glance at it, you know, in your own time. I think tentatively we'll try to do something this afternoon around 3 o'clock. I just don't quite know what it's going to be yet. So keep your eyes open. I'll let you guys know. All right. Any other final questions before you get to work? Yeah, Alejandro.
How you can move the input and to mid bottom to the bottom of the word.
Oh, underneath the actual to-dos list? Well, I would have to change my append child order, right? So rather than appending these childs first and then doing my container div at the end, I would have to do the other way around. It's the order in which we appended the children. It happens in order that we do it. Does that make sense? Cool. Yes, Juan.
Please add some comment